Hello, Caroline. Do you have the sound on?
Thank you for saying that. Yes.
Okay, now I can hear.
Now we do.
Sisters du jury, now does it the people coming, sitting.
C'est toi qui as
C'est bien, Andrea? On voit bien? Is it okay for Kate?
Is it, can everybody see everything well?
Très bien.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Yes.
On va enlever carrément leur visage. Tu commences, tu enlèves.
Est-ce que David
David est permanent.
Quoi? C'est une difficulté.
Ouvrez après les fenêtres. Ah non, je suis de la clim.
Normalement, il faut éviter de jouer.
On est un peu tassé. Oui, non. Hein.
On peut prendre des chaises autour de la table pour les mettre dans les bus. Is everybody back in the jury?
Yes. I'm back.
I'm
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think it's time to begin. So we have a jury with people from Taiwan and from Karlsruhe, from Grenoble, and from Nice, and from Université Savoie-Mont-Blanc. I will present the jury later. For the moment, you have 45 minutes to present your thesis work. Caroline.
Okay. So hello everyone. Welcome to my PhD defense. Thank you for being here. Today I'm going to present the work that I did under the supervision of Philippe Charvy and with the collaboration of Hans Agurto-Detzel and Louis de Barros. So I'm going to start. I'm going to start now, yes, with a quick introduction to the context of my work. So my thesis is on Ecuador. So Ecuador is situated right here in South America. It's part of a region here that's known as the Ring of Fire, which is a region around the Pacific Ocean that has an enhanced seismic and volcanic activity. And this is because this region is home to a process known as subduction, which is where one tectonic plate sinks under another tectonic plate. So in the case of Ecuador, the Nazca plate sinks under the South American plate here. Now, subduction zones are regions that host several different types of slip. As you can see here, this is a diagram here of a subduction zone, and you can see the plate interface here, which is also known as the megathrust. And along this plate interface, we have different modes of slip that are partitioned in depth. And that's because the mineralogy and the fluid pressure and the temperature all change with depth in subduction zones, and that changes how the friction works. So there are a few main different types of slip. The first and the most destructive is earthquakes. So earthquakes are a type of fast, unstable slip that produces seismic waves. Usually large earthquakes in subduction zones occur within this region here, which is called the seismogenic zone. And they nucleate on these regions here that are called asperities, which are regions that can accumulate strain. Usually after a large earthquake, we also have a release of stress in the form of aftershocks, which are smaller earthquakes, and also afterslip, which is a type of aseismic slip that occurs right after a main earthquake. But there are other types of aseismic slip within subduction zones. And we have up dip and down dip of the rupture, primarily stable aseismic slip. But we can also have transient episodes of aseismic slip, which are known as slow slip events. Now, these forms of slow slip, while they are primarily aseismic, they can also be accompanied by seismic signals, such as tremors, seismic swarms, and repeating earthquakes, which is what I'm going to talk more about today. So repeating earthquakes are these earthquakes that happen multiple times on the same asperity and with the same focal mechanism, and usually with similar magnitudes. So they're thought to be earthquakes that happen on an asperity that is embedded within a slowly slipping fault plane, which is why they recur. And so because of that, they can be detected in two main ways. One of them is by looking at their location and their source overlap, which is, here's an example here. And another technique is by looking at their waveform similarity. As you can see here, that they tend to have very similar waveforms. Now, repeaters are useful for a few different things. The main one being that they are useful to measure aseismic slip. Now, this is explained here in this diagram, where we have a fault plane here. And you can see that the blue portion right here is the portion of the fault plane that is slowly slipping. And it's slipping at this kind of constant rate here. And then we have these small asperities here in orange. And these asperities are locked most of the time. But sometimes they slip, and they cause, this slip is when repeating earthquakes occur. And so the pattern of slip on these regions is this kind of seesaw pattern. And so that means that by looking and by measuring the slip that's occurring during these repeaters, we can then deduce the amount of slip that actually occurs on the aseismic portions of the fault. To do so, we have a few different models that have been developed. One of them is a more empirical model by Nadeau and Johnson that was developed in California. And this is, it relates quite simply the amount of aseismic slip that happens around the asperity to the seismic moment of an earthquake. And this model is, like I said, it's empirical, but it's quite useful. It's relatively accurate. However, there are other models that exist and that take a more physical approach, one of them being the Beeler model. Now, in addition to measuring aseismic slip, repeating earthquakes can also be used to track the evolution of various parameters on a fault because they always happen in the same place. So we can track the evolution of static friction and of stress drop on a fault, and we can also track the size of a rupture. And then in addition to that, we can also track changes in the medium, such as the velocity or the attenuation of the medium. These changes can occur particularly after large earthquakes or during slow slip events. And that's because large earthquakes cause, like I said before, slip rate variations, and they also cause the displacement of fluids and potentially rock damage. And all of these factors can influence these parameters above. Now you can see here, this is an example from the aftermath of the Tohoku earthquake in 2011 in Japan. This is from Hatakeyama. And you can see here, so the main shock happens here and it happens here. And you can see a few different things. First of all, the main shock causes the appearance of some repeating earthquake families. And it also causes repeating earthquake families to become, to increase greatly their frequency. And then the frequency gradually decreases over time. And that's because the slip rate is very high after the main shock, and then it decreases over time as well. In addition, you can see that the magnitude, which is what's shown here, is also larger after the main shock, and it also decreases over time. And that's likely related to this kind of increase in source size that we see right after the main shock that decreases over time. That's likely because the increase in slip rate can cause some portions of the fault that were previously aseismic to slip seismically. So with that said, we're looking at repeaters specifically in the context of the Ecuadorian subduction zone. So the Ecuadorian subduction zone is here in this context. We have the Nazca plate right here that is subducting obliquely under the South American plate, causing the detachment towards the northeast of this North Andean sliver here. And there are some significant bathymetric features in this region that actually influence the subduction and the seismogenesis in the region. The most important being here the Carnegie Ridge, which is an aseismic ridge that originates in the Galapagos Islands. But we also have smaller subducting features like the Atacama seamounts here, which also influence the seismic coupling in the region. Now, speaking of seismic coupling, the region that we're actually looking at is a region that has a very spatially variable seismic coupling, and in particular with the coupling being generally large in the north and then being generally small in the south. That this is a region that has experienced several large earthquakes in the past, starting with the biggest one in 1906 that ruptured like this whole region right here of the megathrust. And then this rupture zone was ruptured again in three subsequent earthquakes that formed this northward sequence in 1942, 1958, and 1979. And in addition to this sequence, we also have other earthquakes that have happened, including this sequence right here, which is unrelated to the main one. Now, in addition to having a lot of large historical earthquakes, we've also, we now have a growing body of observations of slow slip in the region, notably slow slip that happens primarily up dip of the seismogenic zone, although there is some down dip slow slip as well. In the north, right here near Punta Galera, we have two observations of slow slip with GPS, but we also have seismic swarms and multiplets that are detected every 2 years or so. In the middle near Hama, we have no detections through GPS, but we have detected seismic swarms every 5 years or so, which indicates the likely presence of slow slip in the region. And then down here near La Plata Island, we have, again, GPS observations as well as observations of swarms every 3 to 5 years, sorry. And then additionally, we have one observation at least of an SSE, a deep SSE in 2015. Now, the Pedernales earthquake happens in the middle of all that. It re-ruptured this region of the 1942 earthquake, and so because of that, there are actually some authors that suggests that the energy that was released by the 2016 earthquake exceeds the energy that had been accumulated since 1942. And that would suggest that the region is undergoing a seismic supercycle. However, this is still a contested point. So the 2016 earthquake was able to be detected and to be recorded thanks to a large network of stations. Now, at the time of the main shock, the stations that were in place were these dark blue stations right here. But later on, thanks to the efforts of Ecuadorian, French, British, and American universities, there was a large deployment of temporary stations that helped record the post-seismic period. And this started roughly 1 month after the main shock. So with these stations, we're able to have a pretty good idea of what the post-seismic period of the Pedernales earthquake looks like. So this image here is modified from Agurto 2019. And you can see here, first of all, the afterslip here is shown in pink. This is the first month afterslip by Roland Dunn. And you can see here that there are two main patches of afterslip that occur up dip of the rupture zone, with a third patch here that is actually a triggered slow slip event. And all of these regions of increased afterslip correspond roughly to regions that have slipped in slow slip events before. Now, the aftershocks which are shown here in blue, are located primarily in these regions up dip of the rupture in three kind of streaks that are perpendicular to the trench. And these streaks are, they have been observed in the interseismic period, but we're not really sure what they are. They're not actually parallel to the plate convergence rates, so we're not sure where it originates from. However, they are close to the two main patches of afterslip, and Agurto showed in his paper that the aftershock release in these streaks of seismicity actually followed quite closely the afterslip release calculated by Roland Dunn, which suggests that the afterslip was really driving the aftershock expansion in this region. So with this in mind, we're going to try to answer a few questions here today. First of all, we're going to try to see how a seismic processes influence seismicity, and specifically how they influence repeaters and their timing and locations. But then in addition, we're going to try to see if we can use repeaters to kind of improve constraints on the afterslip, on the location and the extent and the magnitude of the afterslip. And then in the second part of this work, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can use repeaters to understand the frictional properties of the interface and how they change in time as well as in space. So we're now moving on to what I actually did during my PhD, starting with the making of a repeating earthquake catalog. Now, in order to do this, I correlated about 4,800 aftershocks from the Agurto catalog, and I gathered these earthquakes into families of repeaters if they had a correlation coefficient above 0.95. So this is an example of 4 different earthquakes that are gathered within a family. I then used template matching in order to improve this catalog and to complete the families. So template matching is a technique by which we take a template waveform, which you can see here in red, and we correlate it to the continuous waveform that you can see here as the gray. And we correlate it at regular time intervals. And when the correlation is high, we are able to detect a new earthquake. And with this technique, we're able to find earthquakes that weren't previously found by the catalog. So we used the code by Bosset 2017, and we examined 2 years of data. So we examined 1 year before and then 14 months after the main shock. And with that, we're able to have a total of 62 families of 4 to 15 events, which amount in total to 376 repeating earthquakes. These repeating earthquakes needed to be relocated next. So this is in order to get a good, accurate picture of their spatial distribution. So in order to do that, at least one earthquake per family was manually picked in order to be relocated with non-Lilloc and within a 1D model. So this is all of the events that have been manually picked, and this is a work that it was not just me that picked these events, but it was also the product of several other people. And you can see here that the gray circles are the initial locations of the earthquakes, and then after the manual picking, the red dots are the final locations of these earthquakes. So we're able to get a much better picture of the seismicity and specifically the repeaters in the region. And what you can see here is, well, first of all, that we do tend to have an alignment close to the slab. However, this kind of the depths here do generally get worse as we move towards the south and towards the trench. And that's because of the combination of an asymmetrical and changing station network, as well as a 1D model that was not very well fit to this region near the trench here. Now for the second part of the relocation, we used double difference relocation in order to both relocate more earthquakes from the catalog and also improve the kind of finer location of relative location of repeaters within a family. So this was done with HypoDD and again in a 1D model. I'm showing here, once again, these gray dots are the initial locations and then the red are the final locations. And what we can see is that generally speaking, the earthquakes do tend to cluster within these larger clusters, and we no longer see so much of a streak as a series of clusters. And however, the gaps between these clusters do get to be now very visible. Now, for the final part of my analysis, I looked a bit more at the source properties of my aftershocks. And so in order to do that, the source properties, which is to say the seismic moment and the corner frequencies, they are both properties that can be extracted from a seismic spectrum, as you can see here, two examples of. However, a seismic spectrum is also affected by the propagation of waves from the earthquake to the station, and that means that we need to remove this propagation effect in order to retrieve these properties here. So in order to do that, we divide one of these spectra by the other, and in this way we're able to retrieve both the two corner frequencies as well as the ratio of seismic moments between the two. So this is the formula that we use to fit this ratio right here. So I do this on both the P and the S waves, using the vertical component for the P waves and the horizontal components for the S wave. You can see here an example for one earthquake. All of the spectral ratios are shown here in black, with the modeled spectral ratios as the red dotted lines, and then the vertical dotted line here is the corner frequency that was determined for this earthquake right here. Having obtained seismic moments and corner frequencies, we're able to calculate here the stress drop of our events. And so out of the about 1,500 aftershocks that I looked at for this method, about 600 events have reasonable errors on the P and the S waves source properties. So with that said, we're now going to move on to the results portion of my talk, starting with the distribution of repeaters, the spectral distribution of repeaters. So this is a map of the final distribution of earthquakes and repeaters. You can see that the repeaters, which are shown here as these blue triangles, while the aftershocks are shown here in gray. And these repeaters occur primarily within larger earthquake clusters. And they also occur primarily in these streaks of seismicity, which is to say that they occur almost exclusively up dip of the rupture zone. We have no repeaters within the rupture zone itself, and then very few repeaters actually down dip of the rupture zone. Now we can look at if we want to understand the relationship between repeaters and afterslip. We can look at the recurrence times of repeaters, since the inverse of the recurrence times of repeaters should be proportional to the slip rate around the repeaters. And so here I've plotted the blue dots right here are the inverse of recurrence times of all the repeaters that occur within this first month. And then I've plotted in blue line that fits these recurrence times, which is a Mori law that can fit these recurrence times. And then in orange here, in the orange dotted line, I'm showing a model of the afterslip that is based on the GPS data. And that was derived by Roland Dunn. This is just for the northern afterslip patch. However, you can see that generally speaking, the two models match up very well, which means that on a large scale, we probably have the afterslip significantly influencing the repeating earthquakes and their recurrence times. However, once we actually look inside and we look at individual families, we find that the repeaters' moments and the geodetic slip are not so well linked. So we do see that. So here I'm showing the slip that is derived from the repeaters by using the Nadeau and Johnson equation, which is to say by using their seismic moments. And then here at the bottom, I'm showing the slip that is derived from the geodetic model at the location of the repeaters. And what you can see is that there is a lot of scatter here. So obviously, yes, the two properties do increase together, but there is really a lot of scatter that indicates that we likely have either a very heterogeneous slip, or else that the equation that we're using is not quite fit for our model. If we look at it now in map view, we can see this. We can see this a little bit better. So we have here. I'm showing the outline patches right here, or the repeaters and their accumulated slip over 1 month. And then the background that I'm showing here is the afterslip. And what you can see is that, generally speaking, the two types of slip don't really match very well. And there's also a lot of heterogeneity even between families of repeaters that are actually quite close together. Additionally, another thing that we can see in this figure is that these repeaters really don't happen where the slip is high. And instead, they tend to concentrate on the edges. Of the afterslip. This is actually a region where the afterslip gradient would be high, and I'm showing here that indeed these earthquakes do tend to happen where the afterslip gradient is generally high. And this matches better than the correlation with the afterslip in and of itself. Now we can look at this in another way, which is to say that we can imagine that these two patches of afterslip are circles, and then plot everything as a function of distance from the center of the afterslip. And if we do that, so I'm doing this for here, the northern afterslip patch on the left, and here on the right, the southern afterslip patch. And at the top, I'm showing here the slip as a function of distance from the center. And in the middle, I'm showing the gradient as a function of distance from the center. At the bottom, I'm showing in black, I'm showing the distribution of aftershocks. And then in blue, I'm showing the distribution of repeating earthquakes as a function of distance from the center. And you can see that repeating earthquakes really don't have much of a connection to the amount of slip that is occurring, and they seem to have more of a correlation with the afterslip gradient here, as they seem to happen primarily either where or right after the gradient is high. So moving on to the second portion of the PhD that looked at the source properties of repeaters and of aftershocks. Here I'm showing a picture of the stress drop as a function of magnitude. And you can see that the light blue dots right here are the repeating earthquakes. The dark blue dots are the regular aftershocks. So what we can see is that, generally speaking, there's no real difference between the repeaters and the regular aftershocks, except for the fact that the repeaters tend to have larger magnitudes. The stress drops are usually between 0.1 and 10 megapascals, which is to be expected. And they do tend to increase as a function of magnitude, which is not really necessarily expected, but something that's been observed elsewhere. If we take a look at these stress drops as a function these stress drops in space, what we can see is that generally there's a lot of heterogeneity among these different stress drops. However, when we look near the trench specifically, we see that they're overwhelmingly, they tend to be, the stress drops tend to be lower in this region right here. And what about repeaters as a function of time, the source properties as a function of time? Within individual families of repeaters, it's hard to find a pattern. We see that generally speaking, the seismic moments and the corner frequencies and stress drops tend to either stay constant or they decrease over time over the post-seismic period. But close families often have quite different behaviors, and this is just an example of 3 families that occur within this kind of relatively tight cluster right here. And these families all have kind of different behaviors as a function of time. The only region really where we see a general uniformity among the families is actually near the trench, where they decrease. Now we're moving on now to the discussion portion of my talk. So I'm gonna discuss a bit all these main results, and I'm gonna start with this relationship that we observe between the repeater's placement and the afterslip gradient. So we found that these earthquakes happen. These repeating earthquakes happen primarily around the patches of afterslip, and this is something that's not necessarily visible in a lot of places, but it is something that we see elsewhere. This is an example from Costa Rica in the aftermath of the Nicoya earthquake. This is from Yao et al. And you can see here these dots right here are repeaters, and you can see the afterslip as the background. And these repeaters do tend to cluster around these patches of afterslip. They don't really occur where the afterslip is high. And so we can note that in both this case and in our case, the afterslip does tend to be quite high, and the spatial gradient in particular tends to be quite high. So with that said, we're not really sure why repeaters would cluster where the afterslip gradient is high. What we do know is that the afterslip gradient is a marker of the edge of the afterslip, and so it's also a marker of stress. And so there are really a couple of possibilities. One is that the stress at the edge of the afterslip could be kind of directly influencing the repeaters. The other possibility is that the repeaters could be part of larger structures that act as barriers to a seismic slip and could prevent the expansion of the afterslip. In either way, this kind of complicates the little cartoon that I showed you at the beginning of repeaters embedded within larger creeping zones, and it kind of complicates their use as a proxy for the afterslip and for the slow slip. The second part I wanted to explore a little bit is this observation that we have of low stress drops near the trench. And this could be explained in a few different ways. The first and most straightforward is that we have seen earlier than in my region, we have an increase in stress drop as a function of magnitude. And so we could imagine that if the magnitudes at the trench are low, then that would imply that the stress drops at the trench might be low. However, this is actually not the case. Because the detection capabilities near the trench are generally lower than they are on land. We have higher magnitudes here overall, which means that this really can't explain why we have low stress drops near the trench. The second possibility that we can explore a bit further is the fact that shear strength increases as a function of depth, and this should influence the stress drops of aftershocks. In order to test for this, we calculate at the plate interface. We estimate the shear strength at the plate interface, and I'm showing you this here in orange and in green using two different models for the slab. What you can see though is that the shear strength at the plate interface increases more or less linearly with as a function of distance from the trench, whereas stress drops drop significantly more near the trench, which suggests that this isn't really the primary reason why these stress drops are so low near the trench. This means that we have to look at kind of more an explanation that has more to do with friction, and we're not really sure. We can't really tell which of these last explanations could actually be the reasons why we have low stress drops here. So the third possibility here that we have is that we could have slower rupture velocities near the trench. This is something because when I showed you earlier the formula for stress drop, the formula for stress drop uses seismic moment and corner frequency, and it actually assumes we have to assume a rupture velocity. In order to calculate the stress drop, we have to assume that the factor for the rupture velocity stays constant. And so because of that, we could be in a situation where there is an anomalously low rupture velocity near the trench that could theoretically imply that the stress drops are actually not so low. On the other hand, the other possibility that we have is that we could have the presence of high pore fluid pressure near the trench that would lower normal stress, and so it would lower the stress drops near the trench. And for that, this is a tomography section by Leon Rios et al. And that shows quite clearly that we have high VP-VS ratios near the trench. Sorry. And this is an indicator that we likely have a lot of fluids in this region. The last point that I wanted to talk about is the fact that we have uniformly decreasing stress drops and seismic moments near the trench. This is an example here where we see clearly that the magnitudes all decrease, and when we have stress drops, we see that the stress drops also all decrease as a function of time over the post-seismic period near the trench, is in both the south and the north. And so we can explain this. We choose to explain this as a result of a change in fluid pressure over the post-seismic period, which is to say that we in the early post-seismic period, because we have afterslip and we have the main shock that causes fracturing, and the afterslip causes dilation of the plate interface, and that could lead to the pressure being low at the plate interface or near it, and this would mean that the stress drops would be high in the early post-seismic period. On the other hand, as the time goes on and as the afterslip decreases and the dilation decreases, we have an increase again in pore fluid pressure in the system, and this would lead to a decrease in the stress drops. So, to conclude my talk, in conclusion, so we've seen, I have created a catalog of repeating earthquakes that spans 1 year before and 14 months after the main shock. And I find that the repeating earthquakes occur primarily around the two main patches of afterslip, where the afterslip gradient is high. And so this means that using repeaters as proxies for the afterslip in this region is kind of complicated and not really straightforward. Additionally, I find that that we have low stress drops near the trench, and that these stress drops decrease with time, which we associate with a fluctuation in the pore fluid pressure near the trench. As to what could be next, well, one of the things that is worth exploring is looking at seeking signals that could indicate the presence of fluids near the trench, specifically looking for tremor, which has yet to be done really in the region. Additionally, we could expand the study that I did in time, since for now I've only looked really at a small window, mostly in the post-seismic period, but we could try looking at the whole seismic cycle, and particularly looking through slow slip events to see if repeaters behave the same, respond the same to slow slip as they do to the afterslip. The final point is that we could try to use GPS and repeaters jointly in order to maybe try to constrain the seismic slip and the coupling and the frictional heterogeneities of the region. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. And
Okay, thank you, Caroline. You're perfectly in time. Maybe you can put the jury again in order that we see their face, and we wait for those that want to move. Ça serait bien d'avoir les visages. C'est ça que je voulais dire, c'était pas ça. Non, non, les noms, je les ai. On va quand même les laisser dans le voilà, comme ça. Histoire qu'on voit peut-être tout le monde, sauf si les gens tout ça. Ça va gagner après. Voilà.
Juste pour la présenter.
Ouais. Okay. So if you can switch on your camera just 1 minute in order that I present you, Kate and David and just Kate and David. So maybe Kate also, can you switch on your camera so we can present you? Can you hear us, Kate? Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you. So in the jury today, we have Kate Wishwan Chen, who is professor in the Department of Earth Science in Taiwan. So you can see her. And so she's a rapporteur of this thesis. Then David Marsan, who is professor in the Université de Savoie-Mont-Blanc in Easter, who is also rapporteur. Then we have Mathilde Radiguet, who is a physician adjoint CNAP from Easter too. And then we have Andreas Riedbrock, who is a professor in the Institute of Geophysics in Karlsruhe. And that's it. So first we will give the floor to David, who will make his comment and questions to Caroline.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to cut the camera because I feel terrible. I'm COVID ill and I feel that I can't be shown to the public. So I'm going to switch off that camera, sorry. Very nice presentation, Caroline. I'd like to first to say that it was a pleasure to work on your manuscript. It's very well written. And the questions you ask and the problems you try to tackle are important. And it's obvious that you've done a lot of work on this, especially for collecting the repeating family earthquake families and all the seismological part. And your presentation was extremely clear as well. You're very comfortable in presenting in public. That's a good quality. So I'm going to try to, in a way, to challenge you a bit on your observations. First of all, with the main product of your analysis, which are the repeating earthquakes. Because well, that's something I mentioned already in the report, but it's not totally obvious to me that what you're looking at are actually really repeaters. So maybe we can discuss this. Well, in your presentation today, you didn't show the relocated ruptures for the families, for the individual families, but you're giving a plot in a manuscript, so it's I don't know, it's at page 73. So I don't know if you have this with you, so we can discuss on this. Or
I don't think that I've actually put it in my slides, but I do know which plot you mean. Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, you showed two families, family 1, family 5, for the details. One is clearly a repeating earthquake family for me. I mean, basically the same rupture repeating over time, and the other is not. But it seems that the two families are taken as repeating earthquake families in any case. Is that correct, first of all?
Yes. So I showed precisely one example where it was very clear, and another one where it was not so clear. But the idea was yes, because the errors that were involved with hypo-DD were very high. I decided that I would only really use the correlation coefficients. So yes, I did include both of these families.
Okay, so but did you perhaps try to filter your analysis by only keeping the very good quality families?
Yes. Well, so I tried doing that. Part of the issue was that as well as the fact that the errors were quite high, I also had the problem that not all of the families, not all of the repeaters within individual families were actually relocated. I still had a non-negligible portion of the repeaters that were not relocated. So because of that, I was quite concerned that if I used the relocation as well, I would miss out on some families, or I would end up splitting some families just because they were incomplete, or because they were not really relocated with. I mean, the network changes dramatically throughout the post-seismic period, and so that was kind of an issue that I was concerned that the fact that they were relocated with really like a different kind of network configuration would be kind of a problem.
Okay. Well, I mean, really, to me, it's too bad that you cannot show this plot. Sorry, but I mean, family 5 for me is clearly not repeating earthquake family as such. It's not the same as Periti, or well, it's difficult to say because as you mentioned, there's likely some error in a relocation, but it doesn't look like a repeating family. It looks like a multiplet, that's for sure, but it's spread over a couple of kilometers, so it's hard to make sure. Okay, so so to infer a sleep rate based on this is kind of tricky. I would say.
Yeah. This is why I try to. I mean, I've looked at like a number of different families. In my plots, I showed that even like there are a lot of families that just don't really fit very well on this, and I think that it's important to take into account that yes, the fact is that we have some families that are probably not repeaters. It's likely that most of the catalog is repeaters, and so that means that like it's still a very bad fit given all that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the point is that if it's not really repeaters, so you can look at basically local aftershocks as well. So one asperity triggering another neighboring asperity, and then that will really mix up the sleep rate. So yeah, I don't know. Perhaps I mean the one thing that could be done, but just a possibility would be just to revisit quickly your families, just extract your very good families and redo exactly the same plot as you did here, and perhaps you will get a different picture. But
I will say that when I tried doing this, this was a while back, and I'm sorry I didn't include a plot of this. But when I tried doing this, it didn't really yield much better results with regards to the slip. So this is something that I would like to revisit now that I've done the kind of the source properties, and I have a better idea of the size of these earthquakes, etc. But I'm still, I don't think it's going to dramatically improve the slip that I have right here.
Well, to be tested, Yeah, I mean, in the end, I mean, you end up with, this, basically what Ushida or the Japanese group does is to use, a cross-correlation threshold at 95%, which is kind of okay in Japan when you're not too far from the trench, and then you don't know if it's good enough or not. So, I don't know. I would be worried. I already wrote this in a report. And the other thing is that when you relocate your multiplets, you end up with large uncertainties on the relocation. So that's something, again, you mentioned in the manuscript that you didn't take the time to discuss here. So maybe we can come back to this, because normally when you does this job of relocating in double difference, you don't have this very large, relocation error. So, what I mean, do you think that the large error that you get is due to the fact that you're not only using, relative peaks, or that's my guess? But,
so I will say, so originally, early in my when I tried to do relocations with HyperDD, I tried I did a bunch of tests, and quite early I found that the locations weren't really terribly realistic if I removed the catalog picks. So that's why I kept them. That said, you're right that I didn't really. Having arrived at my current setup for the relocation, I then didn't really try to see if the catalog picks were bringing were worsening the errors. So I actually did do that. I did that after getting your comments. I looked at just one small portion of just one of the regions where I did the relocation. Yeah, the main thing is, yes, it does actually removing the catalog picks, just taking the correlation coefficient picks, it does actually improve the errors quite a lot. However, it's still not really at the size where it would be helpful to determine whether two earthquakes are repeaters or not. So we still have like 300 meters of errors.
Okay.
And I think to be honest, I think that this has a lot to again with the fact that we have again this really like the network that is both asymmetric and also changes a lot over time. I think that probably counts for a lot in how much error is actually in the final. How much we actually end up with error.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's not an easy game. Yeah. Okay. So there was okay. Another comment is about the southern patch of after sleep, which actually also correspond to a place where the seismic coupling is very large. And that's something that you mentioned in your manuscript, and that would be good to discuss as well, because it's supposed to be locked, but still you suspect SSEs there during the interseismic period. Well, you don't see them, but you suspect that they exist, and you see a lot of repeaters. In my report, I mentioned splay faults, but it seems to be wrong, because I didn't pay attention to your cross section. But your cross section clearly showed that it's on near the sleep interface. But still, I mean, it's a very peculiar observation, and so how can you reconcile all these observations?
Yeah, that's something I think was noted first by Roland Dunn in her paper. And well, first of all, okay, so the first thing that I'm showing here is the map of the SSEs superimposed on two different models of seismic coupling, which is just to show that, well, it's the seismic coupling is not necessarily very well defined, but we do still find, in both cases, we do still find these two these two asperities exist here. So we likely have an asperity where the afterslip is. To my mind, I guess, because the coupling is just, it's still just looking at a moment in time and looking at how what the deformation is on the GPS at a moment in time. Like it's probable that the interseismic coupling actually changes on the fault, and in particular, in order to get slow slip events, we do need to accumulate at least some strain. So I would assume that would be a portion of it. There's just a very temporally variable spatial. Yeah, so interseismic coupling in the region. It would be my best guess. But yes.
Well, I mean, okay, it's a bit okay. I don't want to spend too much time on this, because that's not really work. But I mean, still, it is related, because that's one of the after sleep patch, and that's where you still see a lot of repeaters. But so the interseismic GPS study was over, I don't know, possibly quite, I don't know, I can't remember, because the papier of Roland. So for how long was the period of time where the GPS was, no, for the coupling, for the interseismic coupling by Noke? Do you remember, Caroline, for how long it was?
How long it was? No, I don't remember over how long Noke looked at the coupling. No.
Okay. Well, I mean, still, I mean, okay. So your repeaters are really on the sleep interface there. So in the end, yeah.
Yeah, they at least they definitely seem to be there. It's yeah, it's always quite tricky because I'm showing all of my figures with slab 1, which is I think the best slab model that we have in Ecuador. But there are some places where it's not necessarily very accurate, but it certainly does seem like the repeaters are occurring on the plate interface in this region. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay. So the one point is that, I mean, when you try to compare after sleep with you know, repeater-based sleep rates, you're looking at, as you know, observables that are, you know, at very different spatial scales. So the fact that, you know, it doesn't agree, the two sleep rates is also possibly due to the fact that after sleep is heterogeneous after all. So and I wonder, you know, if there's any way this can be checked, you know, independently. So you have these two observables. So one is very smooth, so that the GPS after sleep, and the other is very local, at the size of you know, 100 meters, basically, the size of an asperity. So why? I mean, it doesn't seem to be, you know, obvious that two sleep rates, you know, one at large scale and one at very small scale, should agree together. So is there any way, I mean, some, I don't know, assessment of the heterogeneity can, you know, sleep rate at heterogeneity can be done apart from these two, you know, observations?
I think one of the ways that we could try and do this is actually by trying to combine them and see if there is a possibility that these two can be kind of compatible with each other. Would be, I think, my first guess for this.
Yeah, I mean, possibly an answer that could be expected would be to look at the over seismicity, the non-repeating earthquake seismicity, you know, and because locally, if, you know, after sleep is driving, you know, the sleep, so even though you have, you know, this, you know, uncertainty in the location, still with earthquakes, you can expect, you know, to be, you know, precise at, you know, couple of, or, you know, several kilometers. So you could infer, you know, sleep rate directly from the seismicity using aftershocks. So is this something that seems reasonable to you or not?
Yes, I do remember reading a couple of papers that mostly with numerical simulations that show kind of this idea of estimating the afterslip based on the just general seismicity. I think, I mean, yeah, repeaters. Obviously the nice thing about repeaters is that because they kind of theoretically happen at the same place, they're much better for this. But yes, it would be especially, I think, interesting in the regions where we don't see any, well, where we don't really have a whole lot of repeaters, but we do have a lot of seismicity. So like in the north of the main shock region, I think that would be kind of interesting to look at that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, that can possibly be done, you know, if you try to filter a little bit your seismicity, you know, and try to keep what is close to the sleep interface, and you know, getting rid of places where you have too big aftershocks that could, you know, also play a role in the seismicity rate. But I mean, in the end, I mean, you have this intermediate observation between, you know, your very smooth and very local, you know, data. So so that could be tried as well. Okay, so possibly I have several other comments, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know for how long I've been talking, actually. But one thing is that it's what you've tried is not is not easy. And again, because the two things, I mean, the GPS and the seismicity or repeaters are so different in terms of their limitations. What they can see is that it's not an easy game to relate them together. But so I was wondering, if you well, you possibly did not try because you would have talked about it, but it would have been nice to try on other locations too. And there are places where, I mean, there exist already, repeating earthquake catalogs and with very good after sleep models, like for the Tohoku earthquakes. So, from the literature, I mean, is there anything that you've been able to infer in terms of doing the same comparison, for example, for the Tohoku earthquake?
You mean for the comparison between the slip that's calculated by the GPS and the slip that's
basically is the same as you did here. Yeah.
So I didn't try to I didn't really concentrate on this very much. I do remember seeing a few different papers by Nakamura, for example. Nakamura, which I think, yes, kind of estimated slip. I don't think it was with Nato and Johnson though. But they do tend to show that there's we expect certainly like heterogeneity, like there's very, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen really a paper where we have like a 1-1 very strong correlation. However, in my case, it was completely split. So there was very little in terms of the correlation. But I haven't tried looking at that data yet. Yeah, and that would be, I think that would be quite interesting, as you said, to kind of test in particular. Yeah.
It's possible that it's easier actually to do on the Tohoku earthquake because, I mean, this after sleep, the main after sleep zone is really close to the stations, and it's possibly better resolved and both seismologically and geodetically. So but okay.
There's definitely
yeah. So maybe another a last question is about the fact that you find that the stress drop increase with the magnitude when you perform this stress drop analysis, and which is exactly the converse as what Nadeau and Johnson predicts. So is there, I mean, did you try to infer a power law that would actually fit your observation and then reuse this instead of, Nadeau and Johnson?
Right. Yes. So this right here, this right here on the right is right. So this is showing seismic moments. And as a function of the GPS, I tried to, right. I also have, I've also tried to, like as you've seen in the manuscript, I've tried to look directly at the seismic displacement as a function of the GPS displacement. Generally speaking, neither of these tend to work very well. They're also still very scattered. You can see that there's definitely, because my stress drops increase as a function of magnitudes, that means that we're back to an exponent for the slip that is 0.3 instead of the usual kind of 1/6. but it still doesn't really fit very well. It's still quite scattered.
Yeah, well, it's not exactly what I meant actually. Do you still have your plot where you show the stress drop with magnitude? So yeah, actually you see this increase of the stress drop with the magnitude, but if you take Nadeau and Johnson slip law and try to say that the size of the rupture is a usual scaling, and you plug in Nadeau and Johnson, then you end up with a stress drop that actually increase with decreasing magnitude. So that's inverse relationship. So that explain why, Nadeau and Johnson predict that there's more slip, co-seismic slip in that case, than predicted by usual, scaling laws at small magnitudes. So I was wondering, if you, the fact that you observe exactly the contrary could be used and to infer, directly from what you show here, to infer, a slip scaling law that would actually be with a different exponent than, possibly much steeper than the normal scaling law, because the normal scaling law basically assumes that the stress drop is the same whatever the magnitude. So if the stress drop increase, so the slip must increase also, relative to this. So I don't know if I'm clear here.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. So you mean a new scaling law that is still looking at the moment, still kind of trying to take the moment and relating the moment to the slip that's on the fault? Yeah,
exactly the same. Exactly as Nadeau and Johnson, but the fact that Nadeau and Johnson has an exponent that tells you that the small ruptures actually do slip more than they are expected to. Well, actually, what you observe is the contrary with your stress drop. So that could be used to infer a different slip scaling law, and then use this in order to relate to the after slip.
So right. So I think that Nadeau and Johnson, it kind of comes from observation, and then there was the assumption is made that the stress drops are similar. But what I showed you earlier is this. It's the relation between the seismic moments, and in this case, I'm looking at the seismic moments that I've recalculated, and then I'm looking at the top at the GPS that is still in this region. I'm looking at it in log space, but yes, as you can see, the relationship is steeper between the seismic moment and the GPS.
Yeah. Okay. It's compatible with what you observe. It's a slightly different idea that I had in mind, but okay.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you, Françoise.
Okay, thank you, David. So we give the floor to Kate now.
Okay, can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Huh? Is it okay for you to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the presentation was really good. And as David said, it's very clear, much clearer than the dissertation itself, because you kind of condense every important features into the 45 minutes talk. So I really enjoyed it. And I think I spent too much time reading the dissertation, so that I submitted it's like a rebuttal for you. to prepare, but what I really want is to have you use the comments to improve the dissertation itself, right? But other than my comments to the dissertation, I still have some questions for you. Okay, the first one is the comparison between the northern area where you have repeaters and the southern part of the area where you have repeater, and so is the after sleep. So both areas are the regions you have after sleep, significant after sleeps.
Yeah.
But for the northern part, you also have the slow sleep event. For the southern part, you have swarms activities, right? Right.
Yeah.
And in the dissertation, you actually probably only, okay, you show us a sleep as a function of time from the main shock. And that says for the both regions, they have very similar sleep evolution and time from main shock. So my question is, the environment to host slow sleep and the environment to host a strong could be different. And so from repeaters observation, what can you tell us about the different behavior between these two regions? Yeah, that's my first question.
Right. The difference between the north and the south, currently in the, well, when we look at the kind of distribution as a function of time, it tends to be quite similar, actually. The distribution of repeaters as a function of time, it tends to be quite similar. So it doesn't seem to be, I mean, it seems like the processes that are at work in the north and south, at least in the post-seismic period, is more or less the same.
Oh, okay. But if you use the interseismic coupling model, the brown color, it's not really clearly shows the difference. But see, for me, so I'm asking about our expectations on the both different environments to host either social events or storms, right? For let me go back to my very interesting feature. For me, I think what controls the interseismic repeaters have been well documented. So we all know that this bunch of earthquakes has to be isolated enough, right? So when you have the continuous loading, you actually reload the whole system, which is the whole sequence, so that you can re-rupture again and then again over time. But for the after sleep repeaters, it could be very, very different, as David suggested, and it's really risky to say this is the aftershock repeater, because if we don't have a good enough relocation, and people could easily argue, well, they are probably just trigger earthquake instead of, they reset the whole system, right? So for the question I ask, by showing this feature, can you, I would say for the slow sleep event to occur, you may not need the triggering mechanism, but for the strong activity, you need a triggering mechanism. So then there must be something different. And that will be the features we can look into the repeaters if we have some expectations on the the contrast between the two areas, right? So can I ask about what do you think about the fluid, the role the fluid played in these two regions? Are they similar?
Yeah, well, okay, so the first point that I wanted to say is that in the north, we also have actually seismic swarms that are activated in the interseismic period, that are activated by the slow slip, seemingly. So that's from a paper by Vaca. So we know that there's at least in the north for sure, we know that that the swarms and the slow slip are related. As to, yes, the question of, yes, the role of fluids. I mean, yeah, we're not really sure kind of how the swarms and the slow slip are related, and it very well could be that both of them are kind of affected by fluids. I think it's, yeah. I think it's.
So I would.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I would suggest you probably can look into this question using background seismicity, right? Because your main work actually concentrating on aftershocks and aftershock repeaters, but the fundamental difference or the fundamental area that host this different aseismic driven phenomena could be answered probably from background seismicity.
Yeah.
So maybe that will address why you have this is the second question, why the repeaters in the southern part show this the streak like distribution, this linear structure. Yeah, what was the possible mechanism for that, you think?
Right. So yeah, so it's like I said, it's something that's visible in the interseismic period in a picture by in a paper by Font, I think is when it was first published, but it was actually described even before. And it's not really something that we necessarily know a lot about. I think so. There are a couple of things. First of all, it's a bit debated whether we actually have an alignment proper or whether we have a series of clusters, which would be have quite different interpretations. That sort of depends on, and some people have relocated earthquakes and they've said, okay, this is more of a series of clusters, and then other people say this is more of a streak. What we do generally see is that, at least in the interseismic period, usually the middle one is not really very visible. So it's mostly just seismicity in this region and seismicity down here. But it could be related to because the Carnegie Ridge, this is where the Carnegie Ridge is subducting. It could be related to kind of structural features in there. It could also be because it's perpendicular to the trench and not really perpendicular to and not really, sorry, it's not really parallel to the plate convergence rate. It's perpendicular to the trench, and so we could also think of that it might be kind of caused by fluid pathways, for example, that are coming in this region.
Thank you. Yeah, so if we stay with this figure, so that would be interesting, to have some like a long strike, variations of repeaters, topography, and bathymetry, in order to really understand, in order to really explain originally why the aftersleep concentrating at these two patches. Right. So, and that goes to my third question. So, you are saying the repeaters tend to locate at where you have a high sleep gradient, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for interseismic, aseismic sleep concentration, I would say what controls the aseismic sleep to change in space? That is your so-called aseismic gradient, right? If we say so. And then I would say that will be controlled by the heterogeneities of asperities, right? So the creeping versus locked, patches. But what control you think, what exactly control where we should have the significant aftersleep?
Where, what controls the height of the aftersleep? I guess, I mean, it would be like regions that are kind of frictional, where the friction is like where A minus B is kind of sorry, it's conductive to having afterslip in this area. So I mean, in the region here, right, like what it shows from the beginning is that the slow slip events and the afterslip occur mostly in the same place. So that means that it's something to do with inherently, I think, with the properties of the interface at this particular place, and that might be to do with mineralogy, or yeah.
Mhm.
But yes, I think so because you're the question, yes, it then becomes why, kind of what changes where we have the afterslip gradient, and well, why repeaters would be specifically in this at the edges right here. Yes.
Yeah, I think this is this is a very important questions, to answer, because that is certainly associated with the interseismic behavior, right? So during interseismic periods, if you are moving freely, it's impossible for you to accumulate, enough of energy to release during the after-sleep process, right? So supposedly, if the interseismic sleep model is precise enough, then we should focus on, we should get some ideas, we should look into somewhere, is locked and not releasing too much energy through small seismicity. And in order to explain like what we expect to have the after sleep, then we can dig into then what it change their behavior, what makes after sleep change their sleep value in space. But certainly I think this is if you're able to answer the question, as David suggested earlier, like individual observations, or maybe, well, simulation could be something that makes the whole story complete, which is you actually provides a good enough interpretation. Yeah, but so what I'm suggesting is, let's go to the seismicity or interseismic coupling rate. If hopefully, in the near future there will be better coupling model.
I think I think the main issue, and the reason why I didn't really look at a whole lot at the interseismic period is that because the seismic network that was in place before 2016 is there's not a lot of stations, and they're quite they have quite a lot of issues. Plus, I think that 2015, 2016 was like an El Nino year, so there was like a significant gap on a lot of stations that had problems. So it's very challenging to look at the interseismic period, which is why I just looked at the year before. And yeah, I think obviously, like there's been year after year, there's more stations that are put in place. So it's probably something that's going to be become kind of easier as we move forward in Ecuador. But yeah, for the interseismic coupling portion, like I'm showing here, there's quite there is some similarities between the different interseismic coupling models that have been published. But it's true that there is quite a lot of uncertainty, particularly near the trench, right, in this region, which would be kind of a problem if we're looking at these things. One thing that would be quite maybe interesting would be looking specifically at periods of slow slip events, like Vaca did for the north here. but looking specifically for repeaters, and that might be kind of better constrained in these periods.
I see. Yeah. Thanks. And hopefully the last, okay, my last question is the seismic moment, or moment magnitude determination, right? So you use the spectral ratio to determine the moment magnitude, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how about the moment variation or magnitude variation as a functions of time from main shock? Because I don't see that kind of plot, right? You show us a very nice recurrence interval as a functions of time, which fit the GPS predicted pattern quite well. But how about the moment variation in time?
Well, I don't think I have a plot that shows the seismic moment as a function of time, but generally speaking, it decreases, actually decreases quite rapidly as a function of time after the post-seismic, it's after the main shock. That's why when you look directly into kind of families of repeaters, you see that they tend to, the seismic moments do tend to kind of either stay constant or decrease because of that.
I'm asking this is because the recurrence interval is, mainly controlled by the magnitude, right? Smaller magnitude, you should have a shorter recurrence interval, right? So in order to really understand the repeater derived sleep as a function of time, then we probably need to make sure that it don't change too much in the magnitude.
Yeah.
But in many cases, for example, like Tohoku earthquake, you have a very strong influence on the repeater's behavior. You not only change the recurrence interval, but also the magnitude variation. And it's actually very important to use the moment variation as a individual or constraint to see what are we talking about. Are we expecting much less recurrence interval variation because their magnitude changed so much? Yeah, so that's why since you have that information, right? So I was probably you can plot, you can make such plot to at least have a the observation showing, if you want to show us they remain constant, and then you use the average magnitude of a family, and so that you can pull every family together, because you are calculating the relative magnitude relative to the average, right? So that we can have the sense that, right after the main shock, how much the magnitude change. Maybe not much, but maybe you can see something, and the something could be associated with their location. I don't know. So I would just simply suggest that this is probably useful information that you already have, that you can pull that into your discussion.
I think is it something similar to what I show is in figure 74A? Yes, 74A, where I'm showing the magnitude variation as a function of time. I'm looking at the normalized version. It's page 128.
74. Yeah, very simple. Oh yeah, you do have one. And this is from all families, right?
Yes. Well, yes.
Okay. And do you think the pattern actually is clear?
I would say it really depends on the regions. That's why I said earlier, for most of the region, it's quite, I mean, it like I said, it tends to decrease or stay constant, but it's not really very, very visible. I think it's only really visible when we look at near the trench, where there is actually quite a significant drop in magnitudes. Well, at least it's very consistent. It's because when you look at this picture, figure right here, there's quite a lot of scatter because it's families are doing different things.
Right. So perhaps you can, if you are looking into your figure 61, that's where you have an individual family, right? You in the individual family, you show us the magnitude or as a functions of time for each family. And I think that is very useful, but if possible, is that can you also provide, say, at least one example showing very big change in the magnitude? So is that decreasing in time or increasing in time? Or do we actually wait long enough for the magnitude to return to the pre-main shock level or something like that?
Well, it's quite difficult to say whether they return to pre-main shock level because there are very few. I have examples of families that have earthquakes before the main shock. But when we look, it's generally, I mean, it's rarely there's rarely like a large difference in magnitude. Still, it's probably around at most probably around 0.2 something or 0.3. Actually, yes. When I look, for example, at here, there's examples that are like there's a difference of 0.2 between the first and the last, and that's generally like the most that of what we see. So it's mostly like what's notable in this region is mostly that it happens for basically every family where we actually can calculate the stress drops and the source properties. But individually, the changes are not very big.
I see. Yeah, that somehow makes sense because earlier for our case study in the Parkville earthquakes, it's found that the magnitude change actually is actually depending on its own size. If you are smaller, much smaller, you have a bigger space to change your size. But if you are large enough, then you don't have too much space to experience the aseismic slip, something like that. But here you don't have too much. Well, but here, the magnitude is mainly greater than 3, right? Or 2 point something. Yeah, so that makes sense.
That's true, certainly.
Yeah, and the last comment, bear with me, okay, the last one, that is, I want to echo David's comments on the sleep estimates, right? So you are using Bob Nadeau's empirical relationship, but it's important to cite their equation by what kind of sequences they used for their study.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's
so that's why David actually also mentioned about, from the Hawke assumptions, you also have to deal with the stress drop hypothesis inferred from their study. So I think that's also important. Maybe in your discussion, you can mention about another constraints on the sleep. For example, if you show us a very nice, correlation with the after sleep model, then nobody can argue that you are using it incorrectly, right? Because using very simple empirical relationship, you are able to tell them that fits with the GPS-derived post-seismic sleep model. Then I think that's okay. But still, you have to come back to the possible solutions for not using empirical relationship. So some people actually simply use the stress drop to infer the rupture area and using the rupture area to infer the sleep.
Yeah.
You can also infer sleep, right? So maybe in your discussion, you can double check about this.
Yes, I actually, so when I did my comparison between the GPS and the Nadeau and Johnson, I hadn't actually computed the source properties yet, so I couldn't do that. But yes, of course the thing about Nadeau and Johnson is that it's interseismic and it's looking mostly at creep, and it's kind of assuming that the repeaters within a single family are like the same rupture with the same like similar magnitudes and similar stress drops, etc., which is not really what's actually our case. So yeah, that's definitely something that explains some of the differences. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Now, maybe Mathilde?
Yes. Well, thanks, Caroline, for the presentation and the manuscript. I enjoyed reading it. I think I liked also the fact that in the chapter 3 you showed us a bit the dirty details of your work, and I think it made me realize that maybe all of us realize that it's difficult to work on a data set that is not perfect, and I think you really did a lot of tests on what is the best strategy to assess the reliability of your results. So I think this chapter 3 really shows that I mean, you not only have the final results, but there was a lot of work behind that. So it was interesting to see that. And of course, I mean, after that, it was interesting to see the results. So I have a few questions. I mean, the reviewers already asked a lot of them, but I have still a few questions. So yeah, one question was about the structural control on the repeating earthquake location. You said that there is no clear relation between the streaks that you see and well, on this figure, for example, it seems to me that the streaks are more or less oriented in the movement of the plates. Like it seems that when there is one figure where we can see the plate velocity, and it seems to me that they're more or less oriented in that direction, but you seem to say it's not the case. So I was just wondering, especially here on the southern pattern, it seems that the streaks are really oriented in the convergence in the direction, in the orientation of the convergence. You disagree with that, or?
I guess, yeah. I mean, so the convergence is like towards slightly towards the northeast, and then when we look at the streaks here as they're imaged by Agorto, it kind of seems like it's more towards the southeast. So yes, I guess but I said, but yes, it's true that there is enough kind of well, they're not very like precisely kind of constrained. So it could be, yes, that we actually have that they are actually oriented in this direction.
But would you say that the streaks of the aftershocks are oriented have the same orientation at the repeating earthquake streaks? Because when I look at this figure, I would say that it's not in the convergent direction, but when I look at the other figure with only the repeating earthquake, for me, it's not exactly the same orientation. So I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I suppose, yes, that's that is true, yes. But I think like for the most part, the repeaters are primarily located within these larger clusters of aftershocks. So it's kind of it might be a bit strange to think of repeaters as having like the repeaters, like the orientation of the structure of the repeaters as being slightly different to the structure of the aftershocks. But it's true that they do tend to be in the south, at least they are primarily like in the south of this this region right here, and then here. So they, yes, that's that's possible. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was just something that occurred to me when I look at the orientation. I said, but it doesn't. It seems to me to be a bit different from all the aftershocks. But anyway, I don't know if it's relevant. Maybe another comment coming back to what you said regarding the correlation between the after sleep, the after sleep gradient and your repeating earthquake location. So you say in your manuscript that there is a strong correlation between the after sleep gradient and the repeating earthquake location. When you say that, are we talking only about in terms of location, or do you think we can infer something on the amplitude as well?
Right. So when I tried looking at as far as I've been able to see, there isn't really much of a, well, the after slip gradient really evolves in much the same way as the after slip evolves. Because the after slip doesn't really move very much, at least in the first month, and so because there's not a great correlation between in time. I mean, between the repeaters and the after slip, and it's the same with the after slip gradient. As far as I can see, there's no strong correlation in time between the after slip gradient and the repeaters.
Yeah, but and can you? Is there a relation between the sleep that you infer from the repeating earthquake and something that and the after sleep gradient, or it's just a spatial correlation?
It's, as far as I can say, it's just a spatial correlation.
Okay, so so then the mechanism behind would be, as Kate suggested, only related to like heterogeneities and the fact that the after sleep stops in the places where, the after sleep gradient is high where we have a lot of heterogeneities, and this is also something prone for repeaters. Is that the mechanism behind?
That would be, yeah, probably yes. Yeah, it's I guess it's difficult to. I don't know how I would explain why the repeaters are occurring kind of in this region that is like stopping the after sleep gradient, but that does seem to be, yeah. It would be more of a structural control.
Okay. Yeah. Also, maybe an observation I made is that when you compare your sleep proxy made from the repeaters and the after sleep model, it seems that in the places where the after sleep from GPS is high, you tend to underestimate with your repeating earthquakes, and in the places where it's lower, you tend to overestimate. Yeah, I think this is what you see more or less in that figure. So you agree with that comment, or with that?
I think so, yes, and it might also be something that because the kind of the geodetic model is itself obviously a model, so I think that the smoothing might also affect that a bit. So, but yes, it's true that we do tend to see that the kind of in the north there is kind of seemingly less slip that is occurring here than there is here, and that is kind of puzzling. That's not really. I mean, we wouldn't really expect the after slip to be like forming a ring. So
yeah, so it's true that maybe, if you were to consider an after sleep model a bit smoother, it would maybe reconcile a bit, but still, I'm not sure you could find an agreement. But I was wondering, with regard to the comments from Kate and David on the possible influence of the stress drop, and also on I mean, you consider the scaling law from Nadeau and Johnson, well, the empirical relation from Nadeau and Johnson, but there was other that were proposed as well. So, I mean, I don't have the answer, but do you think that using a different law or maybe accounting for other things could help to reconcile this discrepancy? In terms of the fact that you underestimate with respect to GPS and you overestimate in other places, it seems that you don't have the good relationship. You're not using the good relationship here.
Yeah, I don't think that changing it with respect to I don't think that's because I've looked in the manuscript. I've looked at the Beeler model, and which doesn't really work terribly well either, for my case at least. And I've also looked kind of directly at the seismic displacement, and as far as I can see, none of them necessarily. They're all quite scattered. And they don't necessarily, I don't think that they would necessarily improve this very much. But yes.
And I was wondering, because I guess when you make this slip estimate, the number of repeating earthquake that you consider in a given family is important. So if you were to change a little bit the threshold that you take of, I think you take 0.95, if you change a bit this threshold, I don't know how would the slip estimate change a lot? Or?
Not well. I would have a lot more I would have a lot more if I take 0.9, which is what I had originally done. I had significantly more events, like significantly more families of events, but it was not really working very well either. It wasn't really. It still didn't really fit the GPS.
But if you increase, I mean, if you are more conservative and take a higher threshold, I guess you will have less families. Yeah. But would the correlation increase or not?
No, actually, I think so. When I looked at 0.98, it mostly just there was just a very small amount of slip that was calculated just because they were missing. Well, probably at 0.98, we start missing quite a few repeaters within individual families.
Okay. Yeah, and I had a last question, maybe regarding to your concluding remarks and future work. You said in the end that you, as a perspective, that you want to use jointly GPS and repeaters to constrain the seismic slip. So I was wondering how you plan to do that, or how you would do that.
Yeah, so there's as far as I'm aware, there's definitely one paper by Mavromatis that looked at this kind of long-term. They modeled long-term the slip that was occurring before the Tohoku earthquake, and they used both repeaters and GPS, and I think that what they actually did for that is that they looked at the kind of they were looking in the interseismic period, but they looked especially at the recurrence times first to kind of see the global trends that were happening in the different regions. And then they used the Beeler model and I think smoothed things quite a bit so that within small regions, so that there wasn't too much heterogeneity going on. Yeah, I don't know. I've never really worked with geodetic data before, so I wouldn't really be able to tell how to do that. But yes, I know that it's possible. It's something, it's been done.
Okay. Yeah, I guess one thing when you do that is how you assess the uncertainties, especially for the repeating earthquake slip, because when you make this plot in your on a repeating earthquake slip versus GPS slip, I was a bit surprised that your uncertainties on you have much large here.
Yeah.
I think you have very small uncertainties, in fact, in the family slip derived from Nadeau and Johnson. I don't know how reliable are these uncertainties that you put on your data. I don't know where they come from.
So just the uncertainties here in the vertical, that's just the uncertainties that I have on like the seismic moments, and then I'm like expanding that into because Nadeau and Johnson only uses seismic moments. For the horizontal, I looked at the variations of slip that was around the patch of repeater to try and get an uncertainty from that. Just so this is more, this uncertainty right here has more to do with like the location uncertainty of the family actually than it does with the actual like GPS proper uncertainty of the model, because I didn't have access to that information. So
yeah, well, just to say, I guess that's something to take into account where if you want to do some joint analysis. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mathilde. Now, Andreas.
Yeah, hello. So thanks a lot, Caroline. I think it was very nice to actually see now your whole thesis inside 30-45 minutes. And I think you did an excellent job to actually guide us through the thesis and how logical and how you did build up, starting with the observation and then making your model more and more complicated over the time of your thesis. So thanks a lot for that. I would like to continue a little bit because you have this on right now. Actually, I was, and I'm still a little bit confused. How did you estimate your MW for the whole catalog and then also for the repeaters? How did you get all the moments?
So you mean for the spectral ratio portion?
Well, let's start in the beginning, because I think all plots that you show always have MW on. And as people know, working with these small earthquakes, to get an MW for a magnitude 2 earthquake might sometimes be a tricky operation.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
could you talk us a little bit through about on this? I started with working with Hans's catalog originally, which has only local magnitudes. So I used local magnitudes for a lot of the early portion of my work, and then because in the Agorto paper there's a relationship that they found between local magnitudes and then moment magnitude that they calculated using by calculating focal mechanisms. So I used that relation when I calculated in my first paper when I calculated the slip, etc. And then later on, when I actually did the spectral ratio calculations. For this one, I actually, I fit the displacement spectra to try and obtain the initial estimation for the seismic moment, and then obviously the spectral ratio kind of allows for the relative magnitude to be obtained. So there's definitely an error in all your moment magnitudes, and I think you have to extrapolate from the relationship which might be true between magnitude 4 and 6, where they actually have regional moment tensors, and now we are looking at magnitude 2. So, well, yeah, it could be tricky. So the error bars that you might have here might be a little bit underestimated.
This right here is actually not it's not the original version that I put in my first paper. This is actually the revised plot that I did using the seismic moments that I calculated when I calculated spectral ratios. So these should be more accurate, like a lot more accurate.
Okay. Did you ever compare the two techniques? So did you calculate the moment ratios from the catalog with the moment ratios you get from the spectral ratios?
I did not. However, I did in the manuscript. I think in the appendix, I have a plot that is actually comparing the moment magnitude to the local magnitude. It's page 208.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which is showing that there's generally a linear relationship, but it is quite different.
Okay. Do you also have a plot of these spectral ratios you have in your thesis? I think in your thesis it's on page 120 and it's figure 69. Do you have this? Do you have a slide of these spectral ratios?
Yes, actually, I have a slide in here, right? Yes, this is the same one.
Yeah, cool. So I think I'm a little bit suspicious if I look at the right-hand part at the black curves. I assume this is the data, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to find a plateau value, but many of the curves, especially if the spectral ratio is getting less than 10, they end still downwards. So how do you then estimate the moment ratio if you haven't found the plateau?
Right. Yes. So that is a problem that we have, is that there's quite a lot of low frequency noise, especially for the stations that are near the coast, and especially for the small earthquakes. Yeah, that's something. The main thing is that I try to use a lot of spectral ratios in order to kind of balance, because I invert everything together. The idea is to try and kind of balance and make sure that there's a good kind of agreement. In addition, I remove the events when the lower bound of the lower bound, sorry, of the ratio is really too low to be able to retrieve like a seismic moment. But yes, it's obviously, yeah, it's not. There's definitely some of these ratios don't really have much of a plateau.
Mm-hmm. And it's a high frequency part where it doesn't level out. So it's not directly the moment ratio, it's really in the high frequency part. Where could this come from?
Yeah, the high frequency part. Yeah, that's an issue that I have, and it's why I ended up kind of removing a lot of events that just their corner frequencies were too high for the frequency interval that I was using. But because, yeah, a lot of the time the plateau, the high plateau isn't really visible in these.
And these data then you don't take further in your analysis. So all the black curves which are still going down are then not shown with stress plots and all these things.
I'm using these curves in order to measure the event one, because well, this event right here, because it's because there is kind of there is I'm basing it on all of the curves together, these curves together. But for example, in the case of this like high this event at the top here, where it's not really there, where we would expect that these curves, that most of the frequency intervals are small. I don't really, then I remove them if there aren't any good intervals, basically.
Okay. The other question I have is, now we talked a lot of the repeaters and a lot of inter-event times and all of this for the repeaters. I think I would also find it very interesting if you would just use collocated events from the aftershock sequence and look at those inter-event times. So of events which happen more or less in the same volume, which might have different focal mechanisms, so or slightly different focal mechanisms. So how different is actually their behavior to what you see in your clusters of your repeaters? I think have you ever looked into that?
I don't think, no, I've never looked into that, no.
Because this could give us somehow like a baseline or something like what the noise of the data might look like if it is not happening exactly on the same fold.
Yeah. No, I've never really looked, especially to estimate the afterslip. I've stayed certainly on the just using repeaters.
Yeah, especially when you look at the Omori law, I would have liked to actually see the Omori law for the whole aftershock sequence, just filtering out all events which are close to the interface and see, are we getting there the same parameters? Because for the NIAS aftershock sequence, I think the Caltech group did exactly this, and they found that the whole sequence was driven by afterslip. So I think it would be a good comparison to see, do the repeaters behave different to the standard aftershocks? Let's call it like this.
Yeah, that would be quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'd not really thought of that. But yes.
No, I think it just came for me together when I now did listen to your presentation and look carefully at your plots again. So no. So do you have any idea, or what's your opinion about how much are actually your measurements of stress drop, mainly then the source corner frequencies or the source radius? Is this influenced by changes of the material properties in the post-seismic phase? And do you have any idea how could we mitigate for this, or how could we detect that something has changed in the material?
I think, yeah, it's that. I mean, that's a big kind of blind spot that we have, right? Especially when I looked at the for example, at the repeaters near the trench, etc., that we know that if there is like a change in attenuation, for example, that would also kind of influence what we actually observe. So for the part where near the trench, I looked at whether we could actually whether a change in attenuation could actually explain the decrease of stress drops. And ultimately, I said in my manuscript that I don't think that's really the case, because the seismic moments also change, and that can't really be fit very easily by a change in attenuation. But yeah, for more generally, I think it's quite difficult, right? So there's this paper by Kelly, which I think we talked about before, that looks at the evolution of attenuation by using repeaters. But of course, that paper also then it assumes that the repeaters are mostly constant and that it's the medium that's changing. So that's kind of I guess that's one thing. One approach more generally is that we can look at, okay, this is one extreme and how does that change? And then this is the other extreme and how does that change? It might be, yeah, it might also be possible to do synthetic tests, although I'm not really sure. But yeah.
And if we would completely leave the repeaters, if we just say, what are the techniques, what might we have to look at the changes at the trench?
Of course, well, if we have seismic tomography, so we can also try to see if we see like changes in velocity when we look. I know that that's quite difficult, but kind of looking at 4D seismic, 4D imaging of the plate interface. So like using tomography or maybe using other kind of more geophysical techniques.
Yeah, I think Hans, didn't he look with Diane a little bit into correlations, and we could use then correlation of correlations, or we could use the coda actually of your aftershocks and see if velocity is changing over time?
Right. Yes, that is. So it's not a work that's been published, but they did look at the changes in seismic velocity as well. So that is something that can be done as well with ambient noise.
Okay, so I'm still intrigued. So if we are close to the trench, so if you said in the beginning, oh, then the location, the depth is not really correct. So did you use the OBS stations to actually calculate there the spectral ratios? Or how much do you think has a wrong location of one of the events influence or does influence your technique?
For the spectral ratios in particular, you mean?
Yeah, so if the cluster is not at 20 kilometer depth or 30, if it would be at 5, and would this have a huge influence on the magnitudes, or what else could have it?
Yeah, it would probably, obviously the seismic velocity is taken into account. So that's something that needs to be thought about. But I didn't your question previously, I didn't really I didn't use the OBS at all for the spectral ratios, just because they're not really in it for very long. So it's
okay.
Very but yes, it's something that I think I would need to look into a bit further. But yes, the change, changing the depth, it might also affect the stress shocks, definitely.
And just on the right-hand side now, this plot, this is just one station, but all events of compared to event number 20 in cluster 1. Is this correct?
All events that are correlated with a correlation coefficient, above 0.8.
Okay. And then do we get always, or do you get always then the same spectral ratios independent from the stations? Or do we see variations in back azimuths or in distance or anything like that?
Yeah. We do see a bit of a variation with distance in terms of the estimation of particularly of corner frequency. which I suppose is probably due to the fact that the takeoff angle also affects the source properties. But yes, it's not quite always quite the same. Yeah.
But the moment ratio is the same.
The moment ratio, I think, is quite. There is, I think, a very slight difference, but it's quite small. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So and that is then the error you assume then for the plot where you.
Well, yes, there is some of that. Yeah, it's some of the error in the spectral ratio also comes from this variation between the different stations.
So if I would give you now 500,000 euros to do another experiment in Ecuador, what would you do to continue with your research? What would be the observations that is needed? That's the final question.
I mean, if we could install some sort of permanent OBS network, that would be really helpful, actually, I think.
And why?
Because it would help with monitoring these events that occur near the trench. It would mean that we could actually use. We could look for tremors near the trench, but we could also just use that data to be much closer to the actual events that actually occur, and so we could both relocate them better, but also kind of use all these techniques, but with closer to the events and with a much better azimuth coverage. So that would be quite helpful, probably. Apart from that, I mean, there's obviously it would be obviously interesting to image specifically the parts of the plate interface that have repeaters in them. It might also be Well,
okay. That's enough for me. Thanks a lot, Caroline.
Thank you.
So thank you, Andreas. So I wanted also to congratulate you because I really liked your presentation, and especially the way the plan you did, and the way you had a lot of proposition to explain what you see at the end, which was not so clear for me in the manuscript. For example, the fact that the rupture velocity may be different and not only the fluids. So I won't ask you questions because we are short in time, but I have many. So I will give the floor to Philippe, who will explain the...
Yeah. Right now, I have to work. Okay.
To work, yes.
Okay, I will try to give you the whole story, the big picture. I met Caroline in 2016 while she was a master's student at Imperial College London. She was looking for an internship in a research lab for the summertime, and Michele Paolato and I provided her with some seismic data from the Lesser Antilles to process, and she did this work. And the following year, in 2017, she returned for a second longer internship period, during which she started processing post-seismic data from the 2016 Pedernales earthquake. And she has shown since this very first period a great rigor in processing and interpretation of seismological data, and a great interest for research. Also, why come to lock yourself up during 2 summer months in a laboratory when the beaches are only 15 meters from here? So in September 2018, she started this PhD work under my responsibility and that of Hans Agurto Detzel, who was a postdoc here in GeoAzure at that time. And later, Louis de Barros joined our team and also contributed a lot to the supervision of Caroline. And I would like to thank especially Hans and Louis for their decisive contribution to the supervision of Caroline. And after that, I will speak for all three of us. A word about the data. Several of you outlined this data processing, and the Ecuadorian seismological network operating at the time of the main shock was limited. And after the main shock, we quickly set up an international post-seismic response involving colleagues from the Institute of Geophysics of the Escuela Politécnica in Quito, Andreas Rydberg's team in the University of Liverpool at that time, and also colleagues from Lehigh University, Anne Melzer, the University of Arizona, Susan Beck, and of course the support of IRD and CNRS in France. This allowed us to deploy an important temporary network to record the seismic aftershock, as Caroline has shown us. However, it should be noted that this network was very heterogeneous with different stations, various models, and also the field condition being particularly difficult in Ecuador. So the database lacks homogeneity and has many gaps in recording. I emphasize this point because it represented a great challenge for Caroline's dissertation, and she spent a lot of time making the most of the available data. And I think we cannot compare this data set with data from Japan or California. It's nothing, it's very different. Without going into the details, it's also important to keep in mind that Caroline's work program has been turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, the marine geophysical campaign she was supposed to participate was cancelled and was held this year a few months only before your defense. So you finally didn't go on board. Of course, this pandemic affected all of us, and more particularly the students. And this is the reason why Caroline's defense took longer than was initially planned. And finally, we would like to underline that Caroline has shown a lot of autonomy during these almost 4 years. Whether it is in the processing and the analysis of the data, the search for the best approaches, and the writing of papers and her PhD dissertation, of course. Of course, she is helped by a very good level of English, better than mine, but also by an excellent capacity of critical analysis, which seems to us to be an essential quality for a researcher. Finally, all three of us really enjoy working with Caroline. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Philippe. Is there any question or remarks in the room? Nobody else? Okay, so thank you, Caroline. So we will, okay.
Just before,
yeah.
you have to turn
yes.
the